So, Stella, thank you very much for speaking to us this evening. I mean, I got to know you through Nina, who's lurking in the corner over there. And as you know, at the moment, we are in kind of definitely sitting in different places. I'm sitting,
Yeah,
and you're in. Are we, in Canada, right?
I'm in Calgary, Canada. Yes.
Right, and it's like 7 p.m. my time or past 7 p.m. and it's morning, and I've been sitting.
My morning. Absolutely right. But thanks for having me, Alex.
No, no, it's a real pleasure, and I would explain the way why we decided we should have a chat in a way. And again, is I think the first contact was when Nina, who's working with us on a young people summit in Malta, which is happening in a couple of weeks' time, and we're literally looking at um, this strange time that we're living in, which implies that
Yep.
the media technology is changing, and the whole notion of what citizenship is also needs to be reconfigured. We're also at a strange time when there are five different generations in the workplace,
Yep.
and I think the third one is this, which is where you can see some commonality in terms of what I've been doing and what I think you've been doing. Is the whole issue of what skill sets do young people need in this brave, strange new world of AI. So I think the first question is, I mean, I teach critical digital literacy at my university. I have been doing that since for a long time, 2013. So inevitably, I've gravitated um, into AI literacy, I guess, not just by design. And I've spent a lot of time looking at how we've gone from pre-internet, internet, social media, the collapse of everything else.
It's a continuum.
Yeah. So maybe it's like, why don't you tell people what you've been doing?
Yeah, I just a little bit about my background. I actually came from uh arts. I was trained as a painter and a designer. So I came from that creative thinking space. What we call design thinking, it's something that we learn in art school, right? And now it's being taught in business school. So it's very interesting to see the trajectory of that. And then I ended up doing my PhD in computer science. So, so as to me, it's not to separate domains. It to me, it makes sense to look at it to look at societal issues and challenges with different lenses, if you will. So I've been for the past 11 years, I've been running my own consulting practice in what you call the digital learning or ed tech space, as well as for workplace learning perspective or for organizational perspective. I've been doing a lot of workplace learning, workforce skill development, in terms of helping people transitioning from university or recent graduate from postgraduate to workforce. How do you make that transition? How do you help people to continue to develop and also reskill, as you say, in this very interesting and fast changing times? So that's the bulk of my work, and it could mean strategy. I've been thinking, like you, a lot about AI literacy. I also been thinking about this for a long time from when I actually taught technology literacy or digital literacy to data literacy to social media literacy to more recently AI literacy. It's just a continuum of basic literacy, if you will, right? From reading, writing, speaking, math, numeric to what we call AI literacy. And sometimes you hear the word AI fluency as well. Um, so a lot of the work it's been done is in that space. And also now I've also done some AI adoption and policy work.
I think it's really interesting because there are many parallel pathways to what you've done, and in a way, what I've done as well. Because I mean, I had come from a business background. I did my PhD pretty late in my life. I was in my 40s. I always thought that was an interesting tunnel. And I had no intention, by the way, of getting into academia, but at the time, for me, it was just simply I did a PhD for fun, and I
No,
like
did I?
it's like so I was it's I was trying to get consulting practice, and I thought this was a good, and in my case, I was really interested in those days in social media disruption, power, and so I can see in a way how we kind of dovetailed into basic literacies, being able to communicate. I mean, I
Absolutely.
I still teach it within the Department of Media and Communications, even though there's a lot of, I guess, disagreement now, even on what media means and what communications mean in these strange times. What I what we could do is, because again, the excellence of design is quite interesting in a way. When you and I started to chat and we started looking at AI literacy, see, it just happened that I I had published like a little primer, which is called Beyond Digital Literacies. So actually, it's called Beyond Digital Natives, Critical Digital Literacies for the AI Generation. And I know that you've got an AI literacy framework. So I thought what I could do. And in a way, it's quite uncanny. It's just list what I identified as these digital literacy components. So in my case, I had information evaluation, AI systems literacy, data privacy, data citizenship, human and AI collaboration, um, at, at the attention economy awareness, which is something which many people have had to deal with, old and young, um, ethical integration and continuous learning. And then I look at your framework, which includes AI fundamentals,
Yeah.
data fluency, critical thinking, and fact checking. And I particularly like this one, the idea of diverse use cases. It's not the same everywhere, so context really matters. Right. Yeah. AI ethics, AI pedagogy assessment, and the future of work. So I think the first thing is like, what is this fundamental shift that you can see happening right now that makes, in a way, the traditional concept of digital literacy insufficient, maybe, which requires us to talk about AI literacy and critical digital literacies. It's a bit of a
Yeah. Yeah. No, no, it's so much to talk about really. But first of all, Alex, I think you're really underselling your primer. I think it's a very comprehensive, very thought through piece of work. I was seeing, of course, what's overlapped with my own framework, but also um, yours is it's very interesting because you cover attention economy awareness, right, and digital well-being. These are often overlooked or that needs to sit above AI literacy to just more broadly it is a societal citizenship education. um, and I really like you also incorporate constructive digital participation and citizenship. Again, I think those are you know, big umbrella topics that we need to cover that needs to sit on top of AI. It's beyond AI. It's beyond the current technologies and tools usage. The impetus for me to create this AI literacy is I when Gen AI came about 3 years ago now, right? There was so much hype. It's the number one platform that got downloaded in within a week of over 1 million downloads, right? And it's no doubt AI enter mainstream, at least Gen AI, and so much of that attention is on what are the tools, how do you use them, and there's no foundation of looking at it, more broadly to frame it in a way that makes sense to us. So it's me trying to make sense of it myself. And when I was tasked to create workshops for educator, I need that also to frame the conversation. And and the other component of it is that often we look at literacy and in this context AI, it's how to use things, how to interact with these things. But it's more than that, right? It's not just how to use, but it's intentional development of a set of skills. And it needs to be not just passively understand, but yeah, interact critically, but also as a co-designer. I think the design component sits very strongly with me. I often think we need to drive that. We need to design things, but also how to evaluate these tools. But but also how to manage them and 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 keeping the human voice in the center of things. Especially, I think it's critical for young people entering into the workforce or even before that to 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 understand um, what AI means to them, not just from this is all great or this is all doom, right? I think that needs to be a spectrum of understanding the opportunities, but also the limitations. So I think AI literacy give us that lens, if you will. Um,
I also think that we're making a lot of assumptions, and I mean, I'm using the primer at the moment to actually teach a class at the University of Malta. So I'm actually
yeah.
breaking this up into its various components, and I'm teaching a cohort of Gen Z people,
Hmm.
and this always takes me back to the famous, Mark Prensky, um, almost like diktat, no, of digital natives and digital migrants, and I'm definitely I'm deemed to be a digital migrant because I'm in my 60s, and it's something that I always struggled to buy into, and that's why what I did with the primer is having come up with a framework of what digital literacies might mean.
Yeah.
Is to almost like debunk the first notion that just because you're young, you're gonna get all of this like instinctively. It's that kind of thing, isn't it? But
It's an oversimplification, and I also think it's a very white Western perspective. If you look at digital natives in other parts of the world, it's not the case at all because it boils down to access and socioeconomic status, right? It's not a given that people have reliable electricity, even internet access and devices.
And I think the other thing which kind of intrigues me is I guess, I mean, both you and I are interested in, I guess, people, in my case specifically young people, but making informed decisions, I guess, about AI's potentials and limitations. We're going through a period right now, right, where I'm sure you are too, that we're bombarded every day with some somebody coming up with some sort of wonderful AI tool that you're asked to, pay, $10 a month, and it's going to make life easier. And yet, I guess I was really interested in this whole notion of, maintaining some sort of agency and well-being in this kind of landscape just shaped by algorithms. And I'm just wondering how we can kind of bridge between, in a way, these two objectives that we have, no, in informed decision making, maybe, and also maintaining agency at this time in life. And I just wonder what your thoughts are on that one, because inevitably we're going to be talking about information and the veracity of
Yeah.
information.
I think that's where the digital migrants experience came from, right? I think the digital native and migrant conversation has not been very helpful. Like you, I never bought into it at all. Maybe there's some nuggets there of interest, but I don't find it helpful in understanding how people operate within that framework. If you look at okay, let's say if we take the analogy of natives and migrants, um, what migrants bring for a country, it's different perspectives. It's different context. Understanding it's having that experience, if you will, having that critical thinking skills because you can compare and contrast and anchor different situations. So I think it's underselling the migrants.
Interesting, that isn't it? Seeing the times we live in.
Yeah, I mean, like that's why, for example, my country, Canada, has a multicultural policy. We historically has always welcomed international people. Even the language we use, we don't call them migrant. We call them newcomers, right? It's a very welcoming um, uh, semantics. So because we recognize the need for diversity, we recognize the need for different perspectives and different skill sets, and I think there needs to be um, a recognition between the natives and the migrants as well.
Yeah, so I think we've debunked a bit of that, I think, but it kind of sticks that
Yeah.
And this is where a lot of it gets mixed up, that we make an assumption that because young people are definitely, I would dare say, more ICT literate than a lot of the elder. Okay, I certainly can't come up with a TikTok video in literally 2 minutes like my niece.
But you can critique the platform, I bet, a lot better because my parents are the best um, people to pilot anything because they would question assumptions based on their understanding. That it's not a given that the metaphors we use, even for computing, it's not intuitive. Desktop, Windows, files, folders. Oh, slap. Yeah, the cloud is a very interesting one because people would say, "Why do you guys call it the cloud? It does not inspire trust at all. It's so fluffy."
But yet we try to come up with these kind of metaphysical things to explain, in a way, social phenomenon. I've always been really interested in this reflexive relationship between technology and
But it's
I guess.
inherently human, isn't it? Because we need to tell stories.
Correct. And I guess this is where, we should, I guess, where my interest, and I've been looking at things like a post-truth society for many,
Huh.
I've been looking at, even using, distributed ledger technologies like the blockchain as a way of countering all of that. You can, and I did quite a lot of work on that. And yet, that whole notion of storyification itself, when we try and marry that with information and facts, that's where, in a way, the wheels start coming off the car. No, I mean, in this, brave new old world, some people are saying, look at what's happening now. Don't look at 1984, Orwell's 1984. Look at Huxley's Brave New World, and it's a better analogy of what's going on.
I think they're both useful in,
Yeah, I
they bring a different, perspective, isn't it?
I like you too, but I guess this is where I want to try to get this conversation going, because I know both of us have an interest in literature, and I think that's where I'm a bit concerned at the moment as to where it's going. And yet, this afternoon, I was speaking to a professor of media at the University of Split in Croatia, and she's going to be joining us in a couple of weeks' time. And she was saying that she's noticing something with her Gen Z students, where she said that when they're kind of not very interested in kind of lecture, a lot of them have kind of books, but physical books. Like I said, I haven't seen anything like that in my country, where what they have is
Interesting.
their the screen, and they're fiddling with their phones. So I guess where this is taking me at the moment is because I am really interested in critical thinking. I'm really interested in information. So I'm just wondering that in this, again, brave new world that we're going into, where AI, and I might use the past tense now, has had a history of, say, hallucinations,
Right.
but definitely a presence of deep fakes, and what verification strategies we could potentially have. And while we also know that we're still in this age of algorithmic amplification, so I know that's again a huge lot.
It's just interesting. One of the observation I have, especially the younger generation, I find it interesting is now the default position is mistrust. I don't trust anything to start with. Like the assumption is like it's false information unless proven otherwise, which I'm beginning to shift to that too. It's because there's so much anything you see on media, even conventional media, for example, like newspapers, which you would think has some credibility. It's they make a few mistakes in the past. I don't know if you read about the Chicago Sun journal uh, newspaper. This summer they published a summer reading list, and their titles are made up. The authors were real, but the titles are made up titles. And this is traditional, reputable newspaper. So I don't blame people, especially the younger generation, to say, well, the default is that we think it's false information unless proven.
That's really interesting because I'm wondering if if it's a different thing in different contexts, because this brings us a issue of trust, no? And this is again why you need to have some sort of AI literacy at a time when it's so easy, not just to have deep fakes. No, I mean, somebody can record our voice and our face, and before we know it, we're saying things that you and I are not saying. Could be having
Yeah.
a totally different conversation, I guess. But I'm just. It's not just. It goes beyond the concern, I think, because I'm in my part of the world, and maybe I'm not seeing it. I'm not. I don't know sometimes when I'm teaching young people whether there's a feeling of despair that it's like, we all know that it's hopeless, in a way. And sometimes I even used to, because I mean, we had published this manifesto for young people and information a couple of years ago, and we revised it. And sometimes I'd see my students literally doing this to me, like, move on. I know. And I don't know, wow. you- I don't know if it's move on or not. And I keep on asking about this, knowing that there's this risk of hallucinations at the moment. And that intrinsically till now large learning models are generating content which is I guess convincingly false. I mean, how can we, as whether as educators, as consultants, as professionals, develop these basic recognition skills to spot AI generated content, or even critically evaluate it when there's all this supposedly cross-referencing and independent fact-checking happening, say, in traditional journalism?
Yeah, I think that this is where our expertise, we really need to deepen our expertise, because if I don't know my subject, I wouldn't able to fact check and or even to recognize something is fishy, something is not quite right. I won't know that if you give me a journal article on chemistry. I don't know if it's correct or no, because I don't have expertise in that. Um, so I think this is also the time that we need to deepen domain knowledge. If you were to fact check, if we were to able to critically evaluate AI outputs, I won't able to do it if I'm not confident in my own knowledge of the subject matter. And I think in with hallucination, it's interesting because the technology has evolved as well. It used to be just very convincing output, but you don't know where it came from. Now I give you sources, but the sources could be dubious, right? And so then you have to do another level of checking. You can't just trust that. Um, and I also discover sometimes um, I have a paid version of ChatGPT, and which you would think it's better, but I I'm not convinced, because sometimes I say, "Give me a citation," and I clicked on a link, it doesn't even exist, and it's broken somehow. But the the name is very convincing. It sounds very legit, right? But it's a report that doesn't exist, or I don't like when I try to do research, and I ask for citation or references or sources. Sometimes they're not very good. They're older, they're slightly off, and but what is helpful for me is look at that, and then there's additional links that I can start digging. It give me a direction, if you will, and if the direction is slightly off, I can correct the course of it because I know what to look for. So again, your own expertise really, you know, need to kick in.
And then I
I
think
understand that.
we have to look at whose expertise it is as well, okay? And I want to explore this a bit because since I'm still teaching at a bricks and mortar university, and the approach my university had taken uh, was that it's not going to go away. Okay, so AI is not going to go away,
Yeah.
and assessment is going to be a pain. So the first thing, putting it mildly, it's a thing we should do is try and get those who are in the teaching face to face teaching understand what's going on. And I think it was the right approach. What I'm sensing now is that as it's not just the chat GBTs, but let's look at Notebook LM now. okay, which is something I use extensively. And the university has actually come up with an enterprise version of Notebook LM to help educators even help. I'm just wondering whether I know the way I'm using AI, which means I am getting much better at what we can say is prompt engineering, yeah, and because that's the way we can foster some sort of critical evaluation
Yeah.
and make sure that we have some sort of intellectual control rather than just, here's the essay, but just plonk it in. And I'm just wondering what your views are on that, because I've already told my students that this is the only thing I hope they can get out of my course at the end of it, because of course they're all going to be using these tools, is that they can get better at getting the right kind of, output out of it, but also to retain some sort of semblance of control, which is back to this blessed critical thinking here, which I still haven't, and I don't know what it's like in Canada. I don't know if critical thinking is taught as an academic subject or not. I know in my house it is. Have to hope you had decent peers who taught you to ask why and how. I guess most of the time. So
Well,
I don't.
first of all, can I just be critical about universities in general? Um, it's that the way you talk about it is the way I've seen it here too. It's they frame AI as in such a grudging negative light. Oh, its first reaction is ban it, right? And no, we don't. And there's still policies in university that they just don't want to touch it. They're still there. But then it has shifted to, well, it's not gonna go away. So we had it's very pessimistic, very reactive, like, "It's not gonna go away. We might as well do something. We need policies." And, "Oh god, assessment is gonna be a pain, but we need to now look at academic integrity," and, instead of like, what an opportunity. This thing is broken for centuries. Assessment has never worked. Exams never really work. It's not really testing to understanding. Yay, now finally, you know? And none of the universities sound very overly excited about that. So no wonder students don't want to learn it, because you're framing it in a very pessimistic, negative, uh, reactive. I think that's the word. I see a lot of universities being reactive instead of like, Look at this opportunity. We've been wanting to change, and no, not
Would be the ones driving change.
no.
And um, I'm not sure how elegant I should be with what I'm going to say. I mean, there are people like me, and I suspect like us, who identified a huge opportunity for change within the academy in the way
Yeah.
to teach and learn and co-learn. Because as far as I'm concerned,
Yeah, individual educators is what give me hope. There's so many educators are doing very cool things. I mean, though, to circle back to the critical thinking piece, yes, I think prompt engineering does help. I think now a lot of the language model gives you that thinking steps that makes it transparent. That that that's I think that's something we should leverage, right? But also just think about what you can get students to review. There's a term now called process as product, right? So it's not just the end product. And this happens in a lot of the artists that I talk to in the creative field, right? That use AI. And they have to, the clients are like, why are you charging so much when you give me this end product? So they have to reveal, no, actually, I charge this price because these are the steps I have to go through. These are the iterative uh, prompts or other steps or other tools I need to incorporate, and that I put my own creative input and I work with it. So they have to be more explicit about how they arrived to the end product. And I think that's something we could teach students in terms of like reviewing. And this is something they probably need at the workplaces as well. I think employers have started to demand that. So it's not it's not, but
the issue
it's a good place to start.
it's a good place to start. And I think what I'm struggling with, as I still have one foot in the academy, and 1 foot firmly outside it, which is the work that I've been doing with the 3CR Foundation since 2017, because that was literally set up to do things quicker, faster than a university can, as opposed to a university that is obliged, if it's going to change its curriculum, various processes. That can take anything from 12 months to 18 months. So what do you do with AI? And I think there was an opportunity when COVID happened for something radical to change. And look how, and somehow the academy coped, because we went from people with no choice, right? So they were taken struggling, taken in front of a screen. Some people took to it like a duck to water, and some people kept on wondering whether the students were laughing at them via screen. And I have, yeah. And then when COVID seemed to have gone away, and I've seen very little in terms of what I thought the hope I had at the time, that we're rethink the Victorian people. But now we have AI, and I think this thing is not going to go away the way that COVID, hopefully, as a pandemic has gone away. And I think this is where I'm kind of struggling with at the moment, in terms of, because I'm seeing a lot of individual brilliant academics, educators doing experiments and trying things out and going against the grain in a way, like with via, there's a curriculum which I wrote for critical digital literacies, but clearly I'm reinventing this thing on a weekly basis. And then I think of the workplace, which I know you and I are interested in, because we all know that, from from Ken Robinson's time till now, we've been talking about the lack of creativity in education, and we're not serving people well in terms of when they go into this thing called the workplace. Now,
Yeah, I am a fan of his work too.
yeah, I'm a huge fan of his work, and I was mortified when he passed away, and yet
I
sometimes,
know.
if that was what 10, 15 years ago, and nobody listened to him, and now here we are again. How are we going to deal with this? Do we give up on the academy, which I really don't want to, because there is still something magical which happens when you are in a lecture hall or with people and you cola. So I'm just intrigued by this idea, I think, of learning, how we learn, and also I'm going to put in another spanner in the works, which is, we imply this in a way, the whole issue, I think, of ethics, and I know data fluency, and I know AI systems literacy, which I know you're interested in. So that's in a way.
But I was gonna say, I also read like the university model, because I think you and I are the one that are successful in the system, right? And therefore we had good memories of it. We had peers that were just like us. But there's also other people that just hated it the whole time. And so I think it's not necessarily that we have to get rid of it, but I think we need more alternatives. We need legitimate options, not just, oh, you go into the trades, which is considered sometimes as lesser than, right? I think until we legitimize multiple alternatives, and so people don't feel like I can sit still in a lecture hall. I don't, you know, it doesn't give me joy. I'm not learning it. It should be totally okay, and it should totally have other alternative routes. Especially now, if you look at the statistics of AI displacing jobs, it's mostly entry level. So students are seeing less value in going to universities because they can't. I mean, the biggest conversation I have here locally, I talk to like young people. I also still guest lectures. I still write course content, and what they told me is they had a very hard time getting jobs in what they study.
Yes,
No, it's a big concern here.
it is a huge fascinating worldwide, and I mean, and I'm serious that. Again, we have to look at the differences, I guess, between the North Atlantic model and the U.S. model, where people go to university and get themselves into debt, for instance, okay, because it's
Ridiculous. Yeah.
and then you have the models that we have in Europe, where I teach in a state university where not only is it free, but the students get a stipend for getting to the. courage to go through. And because we have this strange kind of pseudo Singaporean neoliberal model that we have in my tiny country, I'm also teaching people who at the age of 20 are already moonlighting and have jobs.
It's
That's
excellent.
so I'm now asking you, why have you come to university? And it's a question they did not because their parents told them to get it, or that's the accreditation which they feel is their right, that they're gonna sit there, go through the pain of the lecture, whilst knowing that whatever they're hearing, they can probably record it and they can't get into ChatGPT and will come up with better information. So what I'm seeing within the academy, and I want to tail off at this one, is that what I'm seeing in the academy is there are either people saying to assess people's learning, I can only now use I don't know, live sessions, okay?
Mm.
Tutorials or
Orally.
record them, some sort of oral test and something like that. It's come and do a video. And I have been using this with my students in a different way. I said, here's test some skills. Now come and tell me what you think about this. But not everybody is a performer. That implies
Oh,
perform.
yeah, exactly. It's to the introverts.
That doesn't want introverts.
No, no. And that they get penalized for it unfairly.
Yes. So in my case, I'm trying to use this crazy mix of using the tools, using, say, Substack for lack of a better tool, but at least there's no adverts there, even though, of course, it's commercial. And I'm trying to get people to use the tools, whether it's a mix, yeah, talks and videos, to try and get them back to thinking about what they are using. Because there are 12-year-olds, 10-year-olds now saying, why should I go to school if ChatGPT has all the answers? So I think it's for these people that the tools don't have all the answers.
Well, but also we have to teach with the tools because that's what they will be using at work. So if you don't teach with the tools, then when they enter workforces, when they enter a workforce, they don't know how to use them. It's not going to be very employable either. As much as the tools change, we still need to teach them. Look, the future. It's likely that you have to use something. You know.
I think this thing about losing jobs is something, and jobs. I mean, Jeffrey Hinton has now gone around and speaks to everybody and says there are only two jobs he thinks are going to be around, which is being a plumber and an electrician, I think is what he said.
You see what he's saying now?
Yeah, that's it. That's it, a plumber and electrician. So even, everything else is just going to go away. And at the same time, we're saying it's a very dystopian future, right? By the way, the machines
I don't know. Michelin star chefs are still pretty.
but maybe, it's a mix and match, isn't it? So this whole thing about humanity and agency, I think, is something which I continue to think about. How can we teach this? I'm also interested in some of the concepts we are specific to your framework, because you speak a lot about data fluency, that it's crucial because it encompasses understanding the quality of data and governance, and for digital citizens or educators, I mean, in a way, what are the steps that we can take to move beyond this resignation that we can do nothing about fundamental things like a digital footprint, or that I am, my data is somebody else's data.
Yeah, which touches on your framework about privacy, right? You have to understand, like, well, first off, what what is what is data? What does that mean? To even, I think sometimes when you talk about data and data literacy or data fluency, people immediately say, "Oh, I don't want to do that. I'm not good at math," and 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 that has nothing to do with math, you know, and uh, that's the first misunderstanding. And the second um, thing is, like, it doesn't, the second misunderstanding is you don't need to be a data scientist. It is not about that. Like data fluency, it's not about, building data models. It's not about that at all. But it's to understand what is data, how is it being used? How does it shape the AI models? Therefore, the output that we're consuming and using and criticizing, are impacted based on the type of data and the data quality and you know and how do you train your model, all of that. And also it touches on privacy, it touches on um, uh, surveillance capitalism framework,
Yeah.
and it also touches on all kind of ethical issues, right? And even if you are not a data scientist, particularly when you're not a data scientist, you need to know what questions to ask with vendors, with society, with organizations, and to push back when it becomes an infringement of your privacy, when it becomes something that causes um, unintentional harms or consequences. We need to have that informed voice to push back.
I think my concern here is that a lot of this, in a way, reminds me of all the harms we've lived
Mhm.
with s- social media and young people. And then
Yep.
yesterday or today, you have OpenAI announcing that they now have a browser, and I started reading people saying, "Oh, this is going to be interesting." So there's young people using ChatGPT as their pseudo friend or pseudo therapist or pseudo loneliness fixer.
Yeah.
Now there's going to be a browser which is going to be scraping all of that kind of stuff. And again, we're also, I mean, the one thing we've all noticed, whether we're using, ChatGPT or Claude, maybe less with Gemini, that the large language models have a tendency to agree with you or make you feel better. And so again, it's something I'm just wondering, seeing that we failed, and I'm saying we, the collective, even regulatory whole framework about trying to get people to understand, with social media, be careful. I mean, I don't know what it's like in Canada. In my country, we seem to be, we want to try and adopt the Australian model and say we're going to ban any social media for kids aged 13 and younger, I'm saying. And I was saying, it's a good idea, but good luck. Not
Yeah, it's implemented how?
how. How are you going to stop young mums not giving their kids a smartphone when their neighbor has given a smartphone to their kid? Okay. So I'm just wondering how we gonna get around to doing this. And where
Short of a dictatorship government model.
I don't know.
Because I think China, it's not too long ago, that they had a huge problem with young people gaming, right? Online gaming. So they clamped down on it and say they're restricted to X number of hours. Yeah, it works. They, s- it's never gonna, there'll be huge protests here. It's never gonna fly. Yeah, it's a huge concern. But I was gonna mention to you, Alex, an interesting thing I read about. So first of all, you can ask these language model to not be uh, agreeing with you. So you can say, just tell me like it is. Do not sugarcoat. Do not compliment me. So you could train it. You can ask for that. Second piece, I read it just recently. It says if you're rude to these models, they give you better results. Oh, not a great.
that's what I've don't know about.
But I don't want to encourage that behavior either. You know.
So that's a really interesting point, actually, the thing about being rude, because that's what I started doing when, so I'm looking at something, it could be complicated. And I mean, I'm using Notebook LM increasingly if you have like, I don't know, 50 data sources and I'm trying to get an idea. So even if I'm developing a course, of course I had my favorite academic pieces that I've saved for whatever it is, and then my own stuff and other things that I've gathered around. And I find Notebook and Learn very useful from that point of view. But but all of these models have kind of different traits. I find Claude is better at language, for instance, but then Claude has a propensity to also agree with you. So sometimes it's being
Th-
true. And I,
This all to yeah. Sometimes you need to kind of antagonize it a little bit to say, no, I didn't ask you to do this. Like yes, or like. I when they try to agree with me and give me something like, "This is not what I asked for. Don't agree with me on that. I'm asking you to give me, like, an opposite, perspective." And so I think you need to antagonize it, like, for me, that helps. But have you read, The Media Equation long time ago
No,
about it's a communication theory professors that talk about human has a tendency to treat computers more politely, than not, right? It's inherently human to ask to say good.
conflict, do you? It's a part of skill, isn't it? If you have, I like you and I like the girls to get along together, or else
Right.
I don't like you, and suddenly there's a whole this whole balance there.
There's also this reciprocal kind of,
I'm just wondering whether we could just tail off in a way with where we started, which is this whole, I guess, idea, and I think we have a common interest in I guess reshaping the way we learn,
Mhm.
knowing there's a big problem with work, whatever work might be,
Yeah.
and and I think the last bastion of education institutions, which is the credential, which is linked to the assessment. I think because that's what education institutions are hanging on to. No, we all know that at some stage you will.
Well, that's kind of the only thing that's a selling point right now.
Well, both of us have PhDs, and Nina, who's lurking in the background, has a PhD. And okay, that is something which empowers us. But I'm just thinking in terms of, and we go back to this human AI collaboration. Is it possible or not? Pedagogy and assessment. What do we do about it? And I think also this myth of dependence, isn't it? I guess the fear that we will become, and it is a real fear. I think that young people, really young people, will lose that basic literacy that our generation, I'm older than you. Well,
And and I like your framework that, that goes beyond just the students, right? It's citizenship, education, and awareness and participation. It's not just awareness. I think I like that you say you work is, you know, how do we participate in a society now? That's changing so much. Where's our place? In general, not throughout your life. It's not just as a student, not just as a professional, but just throughout every every stage in your life. What does it mean to be a citizen right now?
and that's a very loaded question, I think. And again,
What's your thought?
well, okay, let me put it this way, and I'm going to flip it a bit. Uh, And I think I might have told this to you at the very beginning. For many years, I've been fascinated by the notion that media,
Hmm.
technology, and educations are forces for good or for extreme harm. Because I think all of those three are interconnected.
Yeah.
I think have deep flaws in them and opportunity. We cannot even agree at the moment, say in my university, as to what media is. Because some people will just think in terms of traditional media, and there are people like me who are fascinated by anything new. And they refuse to accept that, you know, they're like, yes, a 15-year-old girl in Gaza is the only way that you knew what was going on when people were being bombed. On the same thing happened in Hong Kong.
Hmm.
And
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
so,
Yep. Yep.
yeah, we have a huge misunderstanding in terms of technology because unfortunately we're still at an age, I think, where technology is still aimed or owned primarily by a few.
Yep.
They're gonna
Yep.
which sit in Silicon Valley. Sure. And interesting ones also sit in China, and interesting ones are in Russia. Okay, but we know our data is not ours. And I go back then to where we started this conversation with. What does it mean to be educated in this
Hmm.
system? I happen to believe that the academic model that we continue to roll out at profit and which protects many old people to retain their tenured positions for many years is not just up for renewal. It should almost be blown up. Now that's not a popular view to have in academia. I think understanding all of those three things mean that somebody can be a better digital citizen at this particular moment in time. But you need to be curious about the media that you're using, the technology that you're using, and how do you learn? You and I are not learning necessarily through academic journals at the moment, are we? We're learning from podcasts. We're learning from snippets of conversations like this. I learn from what my students tell me sometimes. So that's my long answer to what I think digital citizenship is. And ironically, I got to know Nina um, at an OSCE conference because Nina's from Georgia.
Yeah.
And she was sitting next to me in a podium and she was being heckled by somebody from Russia. Okay, you're well.
What?
Yes. Okay. So that's and then it was a conference about media freedoms, which I had helped organize because Malta had the OSCE chair last year. So this whole notion about digital citizenship for people like Nina means that if she says the wrong thing, she might get arrested, for instance, and she's trying to do some teaching. That's what's extreme in my country, but we did have the only one known blogger here who got blown up 7 years ago. But we're still at this kind of strange times. If you see what's the States and the Kings, I mean, for me, the idea that Trump comes up with an AI video of him flying a plane, and yeah, you know what happens in the video is extraordinary. So I think we live in extraordinary times. And I think it's up to us who remember life before the internet, and in a way, I'm almost calling this post-internet to, with whatever time that we still have on this planet, to help others understand that we live in dangerous times, and yet in
Yeah.
exciting times.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't have that perspective, right? They just caught up in day-to-day life. If you put it in context, the cost of living here is increasing all the time. So I think people are just so caught up in the day-to-day and don't often have the the leisure to step back and understand, you know, everything else is going on. So I think it's a good answer. I don't think it's a non-answer. I think that actually frames it really well.
Uh, and I think for me, all of these things are interconnected. I mean, I guess the way I think through these things is I almost mind map these things because I can see connections, and that for me, that's the excitement sometimes. I mean, for example, I'm really excited by that if you put in something, a notebook LM, it doesn't just generate a podcast now, no, these two, but it also generates a mind map that you can look at these connections together. And I think that's something
I'm a fan of that too. It's just another way of processing and understanding information, isn't it?
wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful. So that's why I think taking on this prescriptive thing that is good for you and bad for you, I think we live in this very gray area at the moment as to, and I think we are obliged to explore those gray areas. But my fear is that because power is still vested in this handful of organizations, I guess, whether they're in Silicon Valley and now are in bed with Trump because that's what they decided they had to do, or whether it's just very strange times that we live in. Um, Stella, I don't know if you've frozen up or not. I'm going to pause the recording for a while.
Less
Let's continue exploring just briefly, Stella.
sure.
This whole notion about what can people like you and I do, because I'm not getting any younger, and I'm increasingly less interested in publishing academic papers as opposed to getting something done within my lifetime. So the summit that we're organizing here and Nina's helping out with is really that kind of activist kind of learning that we're talking about.
Yeah.
As we say, we're living in troubled times. This is why Nina in Georgia. I mean, I mean, Hong Kong was not a very happy story. I guess.
No, it's
Um,
there's very few places on earth that are right now.
I think this is this particular time because we started from this whole notion of the academy in a state of flux.
Yeah.
We've dovetailed into digital citizenship on what that may be, and my interest still remains. You know, what is in a way what is the single most urgent priority? Do you think for for educators, but also policymakers, and also those people who dovetail between the world of academia and work. You know, how can we ensure that this generation is empowered rather than made vulnerable by what's changing right now? And maybe the second question could be, if we really achieve true AI literacy, whatever we mean by it, what characteristic will distinguish this critically engaged citizen or digital citizen from the digital native myth of the past? So there are two questions there. What can we do? What is past?
I think good questions. I have more questions than I have answers for, and I feel like my thinking on this is constantly evolving as our understanding of the technology evolves, as the technology itself change, right? Um, I think always in all my work that I do, I I I try to bring a more balanced conversation. That's the first thing is don't hyped it up, don't be overly because I felt like it's so extreme right now when we talk about AI and it's not practical, it's not grounded enough. So I think the first thing I always do is to say, hey, this the overly optimistic perspective. There's a very negative perspective, but there's room to have a spectrum of that conversation, of that understanding. Um, the other piece of it, I think it kind of touches back to your framework on mental well-being. I think it's giving emotionally, uh, um, society is not in a good place. I think there's a lot of anxiety out there. And so how do we address that? Like what can we do to ease that anxiety? You talk about empowering young people. I think most of them just feel very anxious. Just this it's anxiety of uncertainty, of don't know what to do. So I think we need to spend some thinking on that. It's to address the mental well-being piece of it, right? Along with giving them something practical to start building on. I don't think we can give them definitive answers. That time is long gone. I haven't had definitive answers for a really long time. And what I take away from my university days is the ability to know like nothing is stable. Things would change. And I need to, I had to rely on myself to able to continue to change along with that. And I think in the past, it's like you learn this thing and it's good for a very long period of time. And now that is no longer the case. I think we need to instill that mindset and but also at the same time give them tools of how to go about doing that.
I think it's a really good answer, and I think it's the last thing that I had inserted in the framework, which is the need for, and it's a very old-fashioned word called lifelong learning.
No, no, I am a big fan of that, and that's kind of in my my framework echoes with yours is the future of work. It's to look into the future. How do we prepare better, knowing things are changing, right? Um,
And I think that's this very fertile ground. I think for thinking sideways in a way, and I think we're obliged to do that right now because
yeah,
there's a lot of rhetoric which is coming in, which is going from the AI bubble is about to burst, and this will be the same as we know the internet crash of the end of the last century. But after that, that's when social media started to.
exactly. It's something else is going to come in.
I don't think these technologies are going to go away. They're going to get more sophisticated in the same way that my AI friends keep on telling me, you think the screen is still going to remain the interface or the phone. It's not going to be.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's going to be it's going to change in different ways. I think it might not go away, but I don't think it would be the way we know it. I think wearables, it's becoming a big market, right? So who knows?
Yeah, I think the who knows is interesting, but I think we're obliged that at least we know what we don't know. And that I think is a skill set that maybe in the same way that I keep on thinking of it, but in terms of literature and music, that sometimes the most wonderful music and literature, which some people have done, even music, not so much in literature, is that people do this when they're very young because they're in Italian they say di coscienza, no, that you just do it. And I'm seeing a lot of that, which is like the promise of AI is there are going to be X amount of young billionaires because they've managed to come up with a bot, which is some props, which is going to make them loads of money because now we don't need to code anymore. Okay, somebody like, yes,
It's the one person unicorn, right?
absolutely. So there's that promise of that. And on the other side, we have what is humanity going to be like? So whether you believe Harari and all of these other soothsayers and I always think that the truth is somewhere in between. But I think we're obliged to understand a bit about what's happening but on one side and another side, because I still think that it's in those gray areas that we find a little bit of what constitutes the truth at this particular strange time.
And that is something we can teach people.
Yes.
In terms of just constantly questioning, right? Don't take things for granted. Don't assume what's happening today, what is facts today, will remain facts tomorrow. And I think that's the critical thinking skills that we all need.
I agree. We can probably finish on that one. And I think we are obliged to help younger people ask questions, ask better questions, even if we told them, even if we deviate from the whole thing about critical thinking. My biggest challenge when I'm teaching still is to get people to actually question, even question what to write, to debate, and we have to go back to those old skill sets to understand. I think what's happening, which is happening newer.
It's and also uncomfortable but informed questions, right? It's don't go with the easy route of like the ChatGPT that always agrees with you. I think we can teach that by negative examples.
Yeah, I think we can conclude on that one out. We can get people to ask better questions, and whether we turn them into, whether we leverage on prompt engineering or just simply, as you said, we, be rude to ChatGPT, whether to put in better profiles and get people to, and in the process, get ourselves to understand who we are when we're using these tools. Maybe we might get better tools in the future at this
Yeah.
point.
Just to clarify, I'm not promoting ill manners. I do not want people to be rude to either machines or humans.
I look at it this way. I'm excited by the fact that for the first time in my life, I feel like I have a research assistant on speed. I never really had a research.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I have a research assistant on speed, and that never gets tired. And no matter how rude I can be, or how I guess how focused I want to be, have a specific answer about saying it, it keeps on coming back with stuff. But I know that it's trained on a view of the world, which includes anything from copyrighted material to the biggest lies that people have propagated and keep on propagating online. And I think we're obliged to try and get people to understand that it's a bit of a mess and that the world has changed to the way it used to be, 3 years ago. And I still think that at some stage, young people will want to disconnect from all screens and go for a walk in the countryside or listen to some piece of music. We're living in interesting times. Anyway, so listen, thank you very much. I mean, for your time, but
No, thank you. This was a great conversation, Alex. I've learned a lot.